I just wanted to send a quick message to say hello and thank you to everyone attending the Progress Annual Conference today. Now, some of you might be slightly surprised to see me doing a video like this for Progress Conference, but I really believe that it's now more important than ever for the centre-left to be fully united and fully engaged in what we're doing as a party at this critical time. Progress is just as legitimately a part of the Labour family as every other organisation that makes up our broad church. And I want you to know that your support for the Labour Party is valued and appreciated. And I'd particularly like to congratulate you for the excellent campaigning that has been done under the Labour Say banner. It's absolutely right to focus on encouraging the next generation of ideas and talent to come forward and get involved in our party. And you've done some excellent work mobilising members to make their voices heard in the debate over our Brexit position. So thank you for helping to keep this issue firmly on the agenda. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on the future of the left recently, and it's important no one part of our movement claims a monopoly on radicalism while others are pigeonholed as happy with the status quo. A desire for radical change is what brought me into the Labour Party when I was 15 years old. And I know the same drive and determination to see our society change for the better is why you are sat in this room today. So thank you for being here and thank you for your passion and drive. I hope you have a great conference and I'm really sorry I can't be there personally. Have a good day.
Hello everyone, and thanks so much for coming to this session, which is really aiming to dig down a little bit into what happened at the local elections and look at where Labour goes from there. I'm Gabby Hinsliff, I'm a Guardian columnist, and I'm merely here to keep order during the post-mortem, essentially. None of you will need reminding that this one could have gone better. The Tories had a terrible night, obviously, losing upwards of 1,300 councillors, but instead of making gains against a governing party in trouble, Labour somehow managed to go backwards too, and it was the Liberal Democrats who came back from the dead. So if people are in some way hesitating to make the leap from a clearly unpopular government to the main opposition, then why are they hesitating? To answer that question and many others, we have a fantastic panel of politicians at all levels of government and in one case none. So starting from my left, Farah Hussain is Cabinet Minister for Housing and Homelessness at the London Borough of Redbridge. Mary Cray is Labour MP for Wakefield, which did hold local elections on May the 2nd. And beyond her, Seb Dance is MEP for London, so facing another set of elections very shortly. Beyond him, Stephen Bush is political editor at The New Statesman, and I'm sure the one many of you turn to reading straight after an election. And at the far end, Dame Margaret Hodge needs no introduction, but is going to get one anyway, as former Education Minister, terror of tax dodgers, and MP for Barking, who has never been afraid of asking awkward questions. I'm going to ask each of them to sketch out very briefly where they think Labour should go from here, and then it's over to you for questions, so please do make the most of your opportunity and ask whatever you'd like to. So can I ask Mary to kick off, please?
Okay.
Sorry, that took you by surprise.
I'm going to stand up just because that's how I prefer speaking. So we did have local elections in Wakefield, where across the Wakefield district we lost 3 seats in Yvette Cooper's patch. One to the Liberal Democrats, one to an independent Labour, and one to an independent. And I think what we saw at these elections was, instead of us making the hundreds of seat gains that so many of us wanted to see and that John McDonnell told the press he wanted to see just a couple of days earlier, we lost 80 seats. Now, why was that? Some of it is cultural. In some of our Northern Heartland seats, the culture is not the culture of campaigning that the Labour Party has in some of the big city areas. It's a culture of expecting your vote to turn out and not bothering to knock it up. So there's organisational issues that come out in some of those seats. In other areas, it was particular local issues. These were local council issues. And with the rise of the independents, I think we saw the rise of none of the above politics. Why are we at that stage? I think Brexit is the virus that has infected British politics. The virus of English nationalism has taken over the Conservative Party, and instead of resisting that virus and inoculating ourselves against it by a clear and principled stand, we've tried to do what Theresa May has done, which is ride both horses and, you know, appeal to both sides on this. And the lesson from the local council elections is if you're in the middle of the road, you get run over from both directions. So as someone who has opposed Brexit right from the beginning and voted against triggering Article 50, my message to the leadership is we've got to pull the plug on these talks. We are acting as a life support machine for Theresa May. She is essentially dead politically. She is a zombie Prime Minister, and we are the electricity and air supply that allows the number 10 Downing Street spokespeople to go out and brief every week that she's bringing back the withdrawal agreement bill, that she's bringing back something, that she's going to do something this week. We are the people that are keeping her alive, and at some point we're going to have to start negotiating with the EU with a purpose and stop negotiating with ourselves. There is no deal that she can present to Parliament that will get through without a second vote attached to it. That is going to be the way through for our party. And I think that we need to come out very clearly and very unequivocally on that. Her deal, a customs union, breaks her red lines, but also does not solve the problem of the Good Friday Agreement and the border, either on the border of Ireland or down the Irish Sea. And I explained it to a fairly senior government minister this week who said he hadn't realised the issue about the border down the Island Sea, which makes you wonder where the Conservative ministers have been for the last 2 years. So I think there's issues around that, but I just want to also say that there is no question for our voters to which Brexit is the answer. There is no question for working people, whether they're in Wakefield, in the Midlands, in the Northern Heartlands, in Scotland, in Wales, the industrial heartlands of our country, that will be served by Brexit. And the research showing that people will be £800 a year worse off, that we will lose billions of pounds in tax revenue over the next 10 years, even with a customs union, demonstrates that this is now a Tory fantasy that was sold to the British people on a false prospectus, many of whom have now changed their minds, and we demand the right to change our minds, have our say again. And in doing that and embracing that second vote, we will be the people who save the UK from the long, slow decline that is the Tory medicine and the marketisation of every aspect of our public life and our national life. None of us want to see that, so we're going to have to move very quickly and nimbly over the next couple of days and weeks in order to bring this Brexit issue to a head and to a close. Thank you.
Thank you. And next I'm going to ask Farah to make a contribution.
Thank you. So I'm going to split what I'm going to say into two parts. The first part is what I think will happen next, and the second is what I think should happen next. So the first is, while the National Party and most of the media and everybody else has been occupied by Brexit, Labour and local government has been slowly plugging away and implementing Labour policies and changing lives for people across the country. In Redbridge, I'm leading the largest council house building programme in a generation, which will see... will see us build 1,000 new affordable homes over the next 4 years, at least 600 of which will be for affordable rent. The LGA a couple of years ago, LGA Labour Group a couple of years ago produced a booklet called The 100 Innovations in Labour Local Government, and it was so successful and so full that they've had to produce a second with 100 more innovations. So over 60 Labour councils have exempted care leavers from council tax, allowing some of the most vulnerable in our community a step up when they're finding their feet for the first time as adults. Stockton-on-Tees Council has established a not-for-profit social enterprise to provide home care for people, providing quality jobs with career progression for some of our lowest paid workers. Plymouth City Council is working with its community and its business partners to make the city single-use plastic free by 2020, ahead of the European deadline. So while we can talk about last week's local elections and results in terms of what they mean in relation to Brexit or Theresa May's unpopularity or the country's view of Labour as an alternative government, we should remember that local government in itself is important. And losing an effective local Labour councillor can have a huge effect on an area. As councillors, while Rome burns, we will carry on. The bins will still get collected, the services will carry on, the libraries will probably mostly stay open, and the street lights will stay on. Simple things, but not so simple when you've had 60% of your funding cut. And we're working in the most extreme of circumstances with not just austerity, but a government that really couldn't care less about the services that we provide. So what's next for Labour in local government is probably more of the same. We'll carry on, and we'll carry on serving our residents as best as we can. We've had to be really innovative to make sure that we can, under the circumstances, that we can keep basic services going, but that's what we'll keep on doing. But what I would like to see next is greater recognition for the work that we do, that really important work that we do, providing the services that people mostly rely on. And I would like that. I would like a little bit more than just a few warm words at a LGA Labour conference speech. I would like real recognition at the heart of the party. Councillors across the country are foot soldiers of the party. Any local organiser knows that if you want to get the leaflets delivered, you drop them off at the door of the local councillor who'll divvy them up and get them through doors. We're the most active activists in the party, and we're huge funders. I pay 7% of all my allowance into the party. Altogether, we pay millions of pounds, but we don't have the recognition that we deserve. We need more than just 2 representatives on the NEC. We need the National Party to stop trying to undermine the autonomy of local councillors by proposing the proposals to have local members elect the leader of councils were completely misguided, and I'm glad that the party's going back to look at those again. Also, while I'm at it, while I'm talking about my wishes, it would be absolutely fantastic to have the first ever female Metro Mayor. Across local government, women are underrepresented, and while there's been great progress in the PLP to bring that up to nearly 50%, women are hugely underrepresented in local government, with just 17% of leaders of councils being women, and that's across all parties. Women, once they're elected, they leave earlier and they face huge barriers in entering local government. We need the party to address the barriers that we face, be it pay, pensions, our personal details being there for everybody to see, childcare arrangements, parental leave, and LGA Labour are doing some really good, fantastic work on this. But it'd be great if the Labour Party, as a general, could back us up and support us in our fight for equality. And it is hugely disappointing that exactly 0% of the newly created mayoral positions are held by a woman. And I think we have a fantastic opportunity with the West Midlands selection to ensure that Labour has the first ever female Metro Mayor.
Thank you very much. Lots of furious nodding in the audience there. I think some much needed local perspective. And now I'm going to ask Seb, who presumably has been spending quite a lot of time on the doorsteps lately, to come in.
Yes, thank you. Fresh from the doorstep, in fact, in Hackney, in my chauffeur-driven number 38 bus. Yes, I mean, it won't surprise anyone here to know that I agree fully with everything that Mary's said about Brexit. And Farah, I would love to be having a proper conversation about how we get local decision-making at a European level, represented at a European level as part of the reforms to the European Union that we should be leading and fighting for as a movement. But of course, we are instead embroiled in the discussion about whether or not we can even still be at the table when it comes to European decision-making. But in my experience in Europe, it has always been the cities and the regions that have had the most ambition, particularly when it comes to fighting things like climate change and poor air quality. So anything we can do, let's say we stay in Europe, anything we can do to fight for that, we will. I think we are at this kind of juncture in time at the moment where things are changing so quickly, and it's largely driven, I think, by technological change. And none of us really knows where this revolution is going to end up. And it's transforming everything. It's transforming the world of work. It's not just the automation that we hear about in manufacturing, it's happening in services as well. It's a complete change in the way in which we interact with each other, that we communicate as citizens, how we interact with the services that are provided publicly. And it also is affecting the way in which we feel about our place in the world, how secure we feel, what we feel about the prospects of ourselves and our children and our children's children. And what is effectively happening is you have populists coming along who are feeding on people's fears, feeding on the trepidation that people feel about this change, and offering simplistic solutions with nothing that backs up the real problems that people face, but simply appeals to that level of fear that people instinctively have. And of course, what we have, I think, done is perhaps lost sight of the fact that we need to appeal to people's instincts for something not resting on fear, not resting on fear of the unknown or trepidation about change, but that old-fashioned concept of hope. And the two things that people instinctively feel and have always felt, and the fundamentals of which have always existed, opportunity and aspiration. The idea that actually the future isn't necessarily prescribed to be worse than the present, that there can be new opportunities and better quality of life for people going forward. And because those fundamentals don't change, we have to return to the simple message that we have as a movement, that aspiration and opportunity is not just for people who happen to be born into particularly wealthy backgrounds or who have the means and resources at their disposal through birth. But actually we have to give people the opportunity to have those resources through building up and strengthening their networks, strengthening their ability to plug in and connect, not just with the communities around them, but actually with the wider world as well. And that's where the Brexit issue comes in so starkly, because it is in complete contrast to that aspiration and that opportunity. It rips apart the networks that people need to be a part of in order simply to compete in the modern world. It is a complete anathema to me that we as a party could in any way suggest that ending free movement will increase the opportunities for young people. When you think about the technological change that we're undergoing, you immediately have to think about where the jobs of the future are going to come from, because we can't sit there like Luddites and pretend that technological change can be stopped. It will happen. It is happening, and there's nothing any of us can do about it to stop it. But we can adapt, and we can look at where the opportunities for people in the world of work will be, and it will be where you have analytical skills and where you are critically networked. And it breaks my heart to think that we as a developed nation might be pretty much the only country in Western Europe where our young people are put at that instant competitive disadvantage because we have ripped ourselves out of the networks that people need and will depend on in the future to get decent jobs. I don't think that free movement and the ability to plug ourselves into a wider network in our continent are a luxury. I don't think these are things that are only available for the better off. These are the essential components of making sure that everybody, regardless of their wealth, can benefit from the global economy. And that's why I want to see us as a proud movement of the left, standing up for those networks, standing up for young people, and making sure that we don't rip ourselves out of them because it might be superficially popular. We have to deal with the causes of populism and deal with the real solutions to the real problems that people face. And if we only deal with the facile response to some of the knee-jerk reactions that the populists feed on, we will get nowhere. We will end up chasing our own tails and running around in circles, and that's not what we came into politics to do.
Thanks very much, Seb. And now I'd like to bring in Stephen, please.
Right. So I guess kind of the first obvious conclusion about the local elections is it showed that people are willing to do anything and vote for anyone to get rid of the Conservatives other than vote for the Labour Party. So what next for Labour? I mean, self-evidently not majority government on that reading. It's of course possible that some kind of catastrophe or event or a no-deal Brexit or a severe recession could tip you into majority office through factors beyond your control. But your trajectory is very obviously not one of a party that is going to take office other than with some kind of arrangement with either the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Scottish Nationalists, or, if you're spectacularly unlucky, all of the above. And I think I do find it sort of bizarre, this kind of odd disconnect between a Labour Party which seems to have developed an acute sense of outside of England blindness, right? You've noticed that you've got a bit of a problem in Wales and Scotland with two proudly anti-Brexit nationalist parties, but because you don't have an obvious solution, you've just started to pretend that it doesn't exist and just kind of go, oh, well, when we're in office then we'll do all of these radical things. Well, with what majority? With what votes? With what parliamentary time? You know, what is the... this kind of bizarre sort of delusion that the local elections don't quite seem to have pierced. Unfortunately, I don't think the solution to your problems is quite as simple as merely having a clearer position on Brexit, although obviously there are other reasons to do that. I think the slightly frustrating truth for anyone who would like to stay in the European Union is I'm not convinced that ambiguity isn't still your best available strategy, because Remainers seem to want to do anything to get a second referendum other than even mildly inconvenience the Labour Party. We saw that with the collapse of an attempt to have a pro-Remain candidate in Peterborough because it might cause you not to win a by-election, which does kind of mean that from a purely electoral perspective, the case that Remainers are going to hurt you if you continue on your kind of pro-Brexit path is not yet proven. It feels a bit like the story of the boy who cried wolf, with the important caveat, of course, and at the end of the story, the wolf does turn up, right? I wouldn't want to bet anything on the idea that Remainers' patience with you is an indefinite commodity, because it may well not be. I think there are lots of other sort of troubling subplots in the local elections. The argument some people try and make is, oh, well, there was a low turnout. People don't, your coalition of the young, the working class in big cities, social liberals are all groups who, for one reason or another, are less inclined to turn up for local elections. The problem is that the Green Party's coalition is the young, social liberals, ethnic minorities, and people who are likely to give local elections a miss. And they actually gained quite a lot of seats in the local election. So, I mean, if you cannot, at this point in your present political position, be the unquestioned home of insurgent voters, who are you the unquestioned home of? I mean, like, literally, if you cannot in your present formation defeat the Green Party, I mean, you're not even being very effective at being a radical party of the left. I mean, and small wonder when you consider that after 3 years, the only thing you have to say on drugs is that you will hire more border guards. Your policy on climate change, with some honourable exceptions, seems to be in favour of coal mining Heathrow while having increasingly alarming nouns to describe the climate crisis. I mean, I agree with all of the alarming nouns. I just think it's a bit ridiculous for the Labour Party to say we're the first people to declare a climate emergency, but by the way, this new coal mine is fine because it's next to a steel factory. But there's another important thing about the success of the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, right? Which is that you would have to have a very short memory to believe that the Liberal Democrats and the Greens' respective clearer and more progressive policy positions have always got them a number of friends. But ultimately, if you do want to take the climate crisis seriously, instead of this kind of, shift F7 thing, where kind of this week it's an emergency, next week it's a catastrophe, maybe by June you'll be dropping the F-bomb and still planning to expand Heathrow. The reason why they occupy the position they do on airport expansion and car ownership and talk about being open to a meat tax is not because they think that being pro a meat tax is going to make loads of people, embrace the Greens with open arms. It's because in terms of what they want to achieve politically, they know that's where they have to be. And I think one of the problems with your internal debate on Brexit is it's somehow become solely this argument about what is the electorally expedient path for the Labour Party. And actually the real conversation you need to be having is if you are going to do Brexit, right, that means that is going to be your political project for decades, right? This thing, it's not just a kind of like, oh, you pass the withdrawal agreement and then you can go back to caring about poverty and you can go back to caring about local government. No, Brexit is going to gum up the works of Whitehall for decades. So if you don't want to be a party whose political project is exit from the European Union for decades, then you have to find a way to reverse our exit from the European Union. And you kind of have to find... Otherwise, the best case scenario answer to this question is what next for Labour is decades of arguing about whether or not a crate should have more movement rights than a worker, which, as well as being a waste of time, is an embarrassing position for a party of Labour to be in.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, I'm going to call on Margaret.
Thanks, Gabby. Well, I'm going to have a slightly different take on the exam question, what's next for Labour, because I knew everybody else would talk about Brexit, and I think we're all at one on the table. What I think is the exam question for us should be is there a future for Labour? And if so, what should it be? And when I wake up on a bad day, Gabby, I feel that the way that the Labour Party has now developed under Corbynism means that there's no room for people like me with the democratic socialist values that I hold. On a bad day, I feel that the impact of populism, which has got extremes from the left coming into the Labour Party, extremes from the right coming into the Conservative Party, means that our tradition of political parties may collapse. On a bad day, I think that cult politics, whether it's Corbyn, whether it's Trump, whether it's Farage, or whether it's the actor who has just won in the Ukraine, means that, again, political parties have a limited life. And on a bad day, I think that the contempt, because that's what I think happened in the local elections, it's the contempt and loathing of politics and politicians just leads people to vote the protest vote for anything but Labour. But on a good day, I think Labour's been around for 119 years. I've been a member of the Labour Party for 56 years, dare I admit it, and Jeremy Corbyn has only been around for less than 4 years. So on a good day, I want to see what we can do to keep the social democratic condition going. So what next? Now, I want my Labour Party to start winning and to stop spinning. And I think that if you look at those elections, it is a scandal that under this political leader, we have lost 400 hard-working councillors from their positions in local government. That is the worst record of any opposition leader for 40 years. That is a scandal. I want my Labour Party to instill an open, democratic and inclusive culture. And what we've actually got is a culture that ignores the democratic will of the party, and we've seen that in Brexit. And I have to tell you, I think Mary and I agree on this. We're both in Brexit constituencies. We've both been Remainers from day one. We both voted against the triggering of Article 50, and I don't think I've lost a single vote in my constituency on that. And in the campaigning that I've been doing in the last couple of weeks, people are moving away from Labour in our heartlands because they hate Jeremy Corbyn. And in the middle-class areas, the constituencies that we need to move, they're moving away because of Brexit. So both ways, we're not winning. So I think he should have stood by the democratic will of the party. I want the Labour Party to boast a culture where nepotism is banned from the party machinery. And where people get their jobs because of because of what they can do, their skills, their experience, and their commitment, not because of who they're related to, and because of the political loyalty to the leader of the party. I want a Labour Party that boasts tolerance and openness in everything we do. We've now got a culture of bullying, intimidation, misogyny, homophobia, and of course racism. And it's worse. I've been around for far too long, but this is far, far worse than anything we had in the 1980s. I want a Labour Party that actually supports the core values that brought us all many of us into the Labour Party, certainly me. Those values of anti-racism, the values of equality, and the values of promoting international solidarity. And I'm afraid the leadership's record on fighting anti-Semitism is grotesquely awful, just absolutely awful. What he has done is allow a small and angry faction to poison the politics with the anti-Semitism, and he is seemingly comfortable with an online army of anti-Semites who speak in his name, and I can tell you from that. I want a Labour Party that is true to its core values, but it is relevant to the challenges that we face today. And that Seb talked about one of them. Where are we on any of this? We're a policy-free zone. Nobody talks about policies nowadays. It's absolutely crazy, and we face these challenges, whether it's global warming, whether it's artificial intelligence and the new technology, whether it's actually the changing communities that comes from migration of people coming across borders in a way that we will never stop. Nobody will talk about it. And instead of that, we're stuck with these out-of-date, old-fashioned, traditional policies of the 1970s that don't talk to anybody and that have been proved in the past not to work. Finally, I want a Labour Party that brings honesty into our politics. What we've got, if we do have anything, is a whole range of unrealistic promises, whether it's on reversing all the cuts of the last decade, whether it's on promising that we'll do away with tuition fees. Those are promises that will not be fulfilled. And that unrealism, those sort of bribes, actually, in my view, in an era of scepticism, simply against policies and politics, is not the way to win election. So fighting within the Labour Party, which is what we're doing here in Progress, for a party that is true to its social democratic roots and that works to win, is what I want. It's a greater struggle than it was for me in the 1980s, but it's a fight that I'm up for. And I'm going to end with the words of Martin Luther King, who I'm sure on a lot of us had a huge influence. And what he said is, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.
Well, it's a shame the audience didn't like your speech, but I did. Right, it's time for questions. Can they not all be to Margaret? And I'll take 3 at a time so we can get through as many as possible. Gentleman in, there's probably a roving mic. There is a roving mic. The gentleman in the beard who's the most difficult to get to here first, please.
Thank you.
And keep them quick.
Will do. Okay, so our conference policy is that we are prioritising a general election over moving forward looking at alternative ways of dealing with Brexit, including a people's vote. So this is a general election that may or may not come, that we may or may not win, but there's nothing within that policy that says when we move from plan A
and your question
to plan B, when should we move from plan A to plan B?
Okay. And there is a lady in the front row in a black polo neck over there.
Hello, panel. I'm quite interested in the positive use of big data. It is now very massive and is going to form a big part of our future for everything. So instead of the onus being on how it's used to manipulate elections, etc., we have now banks of information that can be used positively against things like knife crime and areas where crime happen. And I'd like to see that addressed as well.
Thank you very much. And I'll take one more question for this group. Over there in a yellowy sort of shirt and dark hair. Lady there. Sorry, I can't see from here. I'm old.
Hi, sorry, I just got to get my... I would like to know what you would say and whether you agree with the public who are Remainers, like myself, to vote tactically in the upcoming EU elections and get in behind a party like Lib Dems, Green Party or Change. Ooh. Sorry, but it's important to say this because I think that, I want to know what Labour would say. Whose policy is clear about wanting to remain, bearing in mind Jeremy Corbyn's official stance is still effectively a Brexit party.
Thank you very much. So
we've got 2 weeks before the votes happen.
So we've got 3 questions there. The first is two, I suppose, related. When is it time for Labour to move from plan A, winning an election, to plan B, having an actual Brexit policy? I paraphrase. The second question was about positive uses of big data. We always hear bad things about big data and never positive uses for it in public services. And the final one is the vexed question of tactical voting. Is it ever okay to vote tactically? And I am going to pick on Mary first.
Okay, very quickly, I would urge you to vote tactically. I'd urge you to vote Labour because on the at the end of the votes being counted on the 26th of May, there will be one of 2 parties that will top the poll. Us or Farage's Brexit party. And I know all the arguments because I have them with people, these arguments are raging in every Labour Party forum. And the point is that Farage has used his position in the European Parliament to infect the Conservative Party, to pull off a few of the Conservatives and to get the Brexit referendum and to disrupt politics for the last 10 years. Do we want to give him the next 5 years? And if you don't, vote tactically and vote for our excellent candidates in London and in Yorkshire, because the D'Hondt system, and Richard Corbett has put an explainer up, basically punishes the small parties. So if you want to chuck your vote away on women's equality, on Greens, on Liberal Democrats, go right ahead, but know that Farage will top the poll, he will have more MEPs than us, and he will have the right then to appear on every TV programme as he has done over the last 10 years. So that's my point on that. Conference policy, we should have already moved to plan B. We should not be persisting in this election over which we have no control and which the Tories will absolutely not give us, and a new Tory leader will not do it either because they've looked at what happened in 2017 and don't want to become the 3-week Prime Minister. So we should have already moved on that, and trust me, we are we say these things to Jeremy when he comes to the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I hope he'll appear on Monday. I can't understand why he didn't come last Tuesday to discuss the results of the local election with us and to set out what we're doing in another national campaign. You know, just we can't have invisible leadership in these times. These are not times for people to go off to their allotments. And the Labour Party in the House of Commons is the only party that can stop Brexit. We are the only party that has a critical majority, the basis for overturning May's deal in Parliament and stopping it. So for all of those reasons, vote Labour in the European elections. Third, big data. In Wakefield, we have an excellent mental health trust, and one of the psychiatrists there, a guy called Marius Adamu, is working with a data scientist at the University of Huddersfield. They have looked at the suicide statistics in our area over the last few years, and they are able, using big data, all sorts of different things. Were they known to the Mental Health Trust? Were they involved in criminality? Did they look at social media? Had they expressed suicidal ideation? Through a series of large-scale analytics, they can predict suicide risk to a 70% accuracy. So your point about the way... So they need to do the next phase of the research, which is to get access to live people. And of course, there are all sorts of ethical issues, and he's got to go through an ethics panel about that. And then there's the question of, if you have somebody who is a 90% suicide risk, what do you put around them? And the fact that most suicides don't present to the mental health authorities beforehand. They're spontaneous, the majority are. So what can we do? On knife crime, if we're going to treat it as a public health risk, we know the indicators, the boys generally, excluded from schools, missing persons, you know, the risk escalates the more things that happen to them. So we know where the risk lies. And the question is, how do we get data laws that are fit for purpose, that allow the public services, the social services, the police officers, the NHS, to cross and shape those data sources to actually make sure that when overstretched public sector professionals are faced with, you know, various people, they know the people that are at most high risk, the most high risk of death through knife crime, death through suicide, whatever it might be, and are able to then put the package in surrounding them to stop that young person, as it generally is, losing their life. So very exciting time, and lots of things it can do to help us tackle climate change as well, but I'll stop and let the panel.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask Margaret if you agree with Mary about tactical voting.
You know I don't. I have to admit to people that the very first time I voted, I was living in Orpington, and at that time it was a Liberal Democrat. It was Liberals. It was the days of the Liberals. So the Liberals, Eric Lubbock was the MP, and Labour didn't have a chance in Orpington in those days. So my very first vote was for the Liberals, as I saw that as the best way of keeping the Tories out. So I don't agree with that, and I don't want to preach from here, because I think you all have to take your own decisions. I mean, Farage starts off as a small party and becomes a big party. What I'm absolutely passionate about for my children, my grandchildren, and future generations is that we remain in Europe. And I think we all, you know, it's for me, it's the overriding sort of one of the reasons I'm still in Parliament, to try and fight for that. And therefore, I think taking whatever action you need within your locality that gives you the best likelihood of electing somebody who will be a pro-European MEP, I think is the way you should go. I really do. And I know that's controversial, but sometimes we allow the tribalism of politics to override actually the values of the judgment that we need to take on particular issues.
Anyone on the panel want to come in on the data question, Seb, or indeed on...
I want to come in on the Euro question.
Okay, Euro question, if you'd like to.
Shall I?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Well, just two things. Firstly, on the Plan B, we should have done it before the European elections. That would have been massively helpful. We haven't. It will happen. It's inevitable. So I suspect it will happen in the autumn, and those of us who are re-elected will sit there and applaud accordingly, but wonder why on earth it hasn't happened before May the 23rd. In terms of voting Labour, it won't surprise you to say that we should all vote Labour in the European elections. 3 reasons. Firstly, as Mary has said, we are the only party that can beat Nigel Farage. That is a psephological fact. The number 2 reason is that imagine a coherent wing of the Labour Party drawn from all traditions of the Labour Party who have consistently argued for Remain, who have pushed the leadership respectively, who have pushed the shadow cabinet respectively, who have talked tirelessly over 2 years with our EU27 colleagues to let them know that there is a powerful Remain movement in the UK, to get them to keep a door open for us to Remain when others, including Guy Verhofstadt of the Liberals, want that door slammed shut. Imagine that there was a contingent of the Labour Party like that. Well, there is. It's the 20 Labour MEPs who have worked tirelessly in the last 2 years in incredibly difficult circumstances for those ends. Please don't give up on us. Please don't give up on us, because, frankly, we need that element in the party still strong. And the third reason is, of course, this is a European election about the future of Europe. And it would be ironic beyond belief if we Remainers turned it into a protest vote, because it's so often the case that people think MEPs aren't important, that actually this is an election where you can send just a protest signal. Please think about the future composition of the European Parliament, because I think we're going to stay and we're in it for the long haul, and we have a real chance. We won the election in Spain a couple of weeks ago. We could win this election and get a centre-left Commission president, and that would just be the best thing, not just for us here in the UK, but for the whole of Europe.
I'm going to go for another round of questions now. So, first, that's a fair forest of hands up. Gentleman in the blue shirt in the front row here, because I know I missed you last time.
Thanks very much. Paul Brandt from Liverpool. Where in the world do the panel think that the simple but wrong solutions that populism offers have been successfully pushed back, and what lessons can we learn from that? Here.
Good question. And there was a hand of the lady in purple in the middle. Just here. Sorry, if you keep your hand up, the microphone will be able to find you. There we go.
Thank you for calling me so soon. I hadn't quite prepared my question. Anyway, the point is, I've been canvassing, trying to go every day in the Holborn St Pancras constituency, and it's very difficult because I get the same answers. I know this is middle-class professional land, and that I get different answer when we go to an estate. But the point is, we're losing a ton of votes. Everybody says, not with Jeremy as a leader, or not until you come out with something better than this feeble little pamphlet, the one we're obliged to hand out, where it talks about a public vote, but it doesn't say an option to remain. It doesn't really say anything very positive about the EU. So, some suggestions
as to what you can say on the doorstep. That
yes.
Might work. Okay, that's another great question, and one more for this round. Okay, because you're very, very keen. The microphone is coming. If you keep your hand up, then they'll be able to find you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Mariana Masters from Lambeth. It's a terrible time to be a Labour Party member. It's an even worse time to be a Labour councillor. Continually fighting amongst ourselves. We can't avoid slates. How do we move forward, and what are the parliamentarians doing to actually bring the party together? Because I fear that deselections are coming, and if we do nothing and just wait for the tide to turn, there won't be sensible Labour councillors left.
Thank you. Okay, 3 quick questions there. Where do we think, and examples of where populism has been defeated and how? What on earth are you supposed to say on the doorstep to people who don't want to vote Labour at the moment? And how do councillors both protect against deselections, but more importantly, how do you bring the party back together so we're not in a deselective climate, so to speak? And I'm going to ask Farah to respond first on that.
Thank you. So first of all, to Paul's question about populism, I actually think we've got somebody on the panel who's probably got fantastic first-hand experience of how you fight populism, and that is Margaret, because the job that she did in Barking was absolutely first class. Being in a neighbouring area, and actually I'm from the neighbouring constituency to Barking, we saw the rise of the BNP really up close, and it threatened to take over the local authority there. And slowly but surely, Margaret and her team of councillors did a fantastic job of bringing traditional Labour voting people, working class, white people back into the Labour fold, and now they have a 100% Labour council and are doing fantastic things across the board. So I would say look at what they did in Barking, and there's a great documentary on that too. And Mariana's question about deselection and fighting amongst ourselves, the Labour Party at the moment is not the Labour Party that I joined. It's not a Labour Party that I recognise. I'm one of those really weird people, and I used to enjoy a GC, and now I dread going to any sort of meeting where I don't know everybody that's going to be there, because they're just awful. And we see what happened in Lambeth with Florence Eshalomi and her reselection as an assembly member, and how some people who claim that equality and diversity is their number one priority, they don't hesitate to throw a black woman under the bus. And we as a party, I think the leadership of the party need to show that that was not okay, and that rules have to be followed, and that we might disagree with other people on certain decisions, but overall we're on the same side. There's a bigger evil out there, and we sort of need to remember that. Whether or not you become the secretary of your branch, overall, it's not that important. What's really important is taking on the Tories, and we really need to get behind each other to do that.
Thank you very much. Stephen, do you want to come in on the defeat of populism one?
So on populism, I mean, ultimately, like, Tony Blair saying kids need fathers, or marching someone up to the cash point to get the fine right away, right? That's populism. Actually, I think there was a brilliant example of effective left populism, which was when Seb had that "he's lying to you" sign, and he held it up next to Nigel Farage. I think populism is a method rather than we see that with Change UK, who are trying, albeit in a very ham-fisted and spectacularly ineffective way thus far, to be a populist party of the pro-European centre. And the Liberal Democrats, with their bollocks to Brexit stuff, are perhaps doing a better job of being a populist party of the European centre. I kind of think that the thing that you all ought to do as good revisionists is try and work out ways that you can do what Diane Abbott did with the whole, wow, austerity sure is bad because of police cuts, which, looking at the political history of many of the people around that, one suspects is not the main objection to public spending cuts that they have. But I think actually it's one of those things where you need to learn from the method in order to make your politics more successfully. I'm also going to cheat and come in on deselections, as I think the only member on the panel other than the chair who's not a member of the Labour Party. I, of course, vote to deselect, often unsuccessfully, elected candidates every 4 years. I think, one of my sort of favourite hobbies is occasionally Tory MPs will ask me to explain how your trigger ballot system works. And the level of anger they have when they go, but wait a second, that's not fair. So you can have a situation in which, the affiliate branches with no people in can decide to protect an MP after they've been rejected by their members. I think the only way to end a factional fight is to win it. And there is clearly a problem in your internal culture that you cannot disagree in a civil and pleasant way, but it is actually okay to try and remove people from office, seeing as that is the point of being a political party. I have a huge objection to the fact that ultimately in Hackney, where I live, the only meaningful votes about who runs our local authority are taken within the Labour Party because of our terrible electoral system. But that is an entirely separate issue. And I think that one of the mistakes that your bit of the Labour Party has made is to argue against things like these elections on the ground that they are divisive. Politics is divisive. The only way that you bring people together, is to have 50% of the vote +1. And I think that often being upset about things being divisive has been a way to avoid the very hard conversations about the fact that we don't have 50% of the vote plus one or anything like it.
Yes, I was going to say.
Am I allowed to come in?
You may.
I'm going to deal with it. I don't think politics needs to be as divisive as we make it. And whether it's in the Labour Party or whether it's across the tribes, I really think, people come into politics because they want to make the world a better place. And that is something, and sometimes we allow, and you end up in a tribe or you end up in a position for the oddest of reasons. It may be where you live, it may be where your family voted, it may be all those sort of things. And I think you can actually create a much, much more effective politics, which is what the public want. I think you're giving a Westminster view, Stephen, and I think if you go down to the community, people are fed up with this toing and froing, and people want a much more consensual project. And ironically, I know we're in trouble on it, ironically, the backbenchers in Parliament, in the way that they're trying to find a way through on Brexit, are working across the tribes in a much more constructive and collegiate and better way, which I think is what people want. And I don't think we need to win, we need a broad church. But can I come to the populism issue? Because
very quickly, you can.
Very quickly. But it's a long issue. But when we had the BNP emerge in Barking and Dagenham, they would have won. They got 12 councillors in 2006. They would have won 50. They could have won 50 in 2006. They got every seat they stood for. They only stood 12 candidates. They would have won everything in 2010 if we hadn't changed the way we do our politics. And it's something I proselytize about everywhere. So I no longer... The way we order everything I do is about does it help me reconnect with my voters? Because it was a protest vote against us. Does it help me reconnect with my voters? And what you need to do, people's politics starts from the local. It starts from whatever is happening in their absolute local environment. And it is the local, maybe local issues, but it may also be national issues like benefit changes or immigration that impact on them in their locality. And what we need to do is get out of Westminster, stop the Westminster bubble, go find fora and mechanisms where you can really listen to people, listen to what they tell you, and they will talk about local issue, then act where you can. So act on the prostitution or the sighting of a bus stop or the litter, and then communicate with them about the fact that you've listened, acted, and delivered. And in that way, by listening, acting, delivering and communicating where you can, you rebuild trust and you defeat populism. And we never, ever once caved into the racism that underpinned the whole of the BNP strategy. We never, ever did that.
And on that note of not being defeated, I think it's time to end. Thank you very much, all of our panel.